My name is Nicholas Griffin, 32 years old, and devoted to genetics research just like my grandfather Theodore. He was more than family, he was my mentor and inspiration. When he passed, leaving me his entire estate worth millions, I never expected my own mother would storm into my lab and destroy a decade of my work while screaming that my brother deserved everything. What shocked her more than my calm reaction was what the DNA tests revealed at our family meeting. Before I tell you this story of betrayal and truth, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against your own family. I grew up in Boston, the city of prestigious universities and cutting-edge research. From as early as I can remember, weekends at my grandfather Theodore's lab were my sanctuary. While other kids played sports or video games, I was peering through microscopes and watching in awe as Grandpa Ted, as I called him, demonstrated simple experiments that made science feel like magic. My grandfather wasn't just any scientist. Dr. Theodore Griffin was a pioneering geneticist who dedicated his life to studying rare genetic disorders. His breakthrough research on gene therapy for Tay-Sachs disease earned him the Lasker Award, often considered America's Nobel Prize for Medicine. His work saved countless children from a devastating fate, and I grew up seeing him featured in medical journals and occasionally on national news segments about scientific breakthroughs. At home, things were very different. My parents, Diana and Robert Griffin, never made a secret of their preference for my brother Jackson. 4 years older than me, Jackson was everything they wanted in a son. Athletic, charismatic, business-minded. From the time I was 6, I noticed how my academic achievements were acknowledged with a quick nod, while Jackson's football trophies were celebrated with dinners out and elaborate praise. When I was 12, I won first place in the state science competition with a project on genetic mutations. My mother glanced at my certificate and said, "That is nice, Nicholas," before turning her attention back to helping Jackson with his college applications. That same evening, when Jackson announced he was interested in a business internship, my father immediately called 3 associates to arrange interviews. The pattern continued throughout high school. Jackson went to a mid-tier college on a partial sports scholarship, and my parents attended every single one of his games, proudly wearing his team colors. When I was accepted to MIT with a full academic scholarship, they skipped my orientation because Jackson had a job interview the same weekend. Despite my parents' push for me to pursue something practical like business or law, I chose genetics. What my parents never knew was that Grandpa Ted secretly funded additional educational opportunities for me, from specialized summer programs to research trips abroad. He saw my potential in a way my parents never did. During graduate school, my grandfather became more than family, he became my mentor. I spent countless hours in his private lab, absorbing decades of knowledge as he guided my research focus. His specialty in genetic disorders aligned perfectly with my interest in gene therapy applications. Under his mentorship, I developed a revolutionary approach to treating certain types of genetic mutations. My research project took 10 years of meticulous work. I was investigating how specific gene sequences could be modified to prevent hereditary neurological disorders. The potential applications were enormous, with the possibility of helping thousands of people predisposed to conditions like early-onset Parkinson's and certain forms of dementia. Every setback only strengthened my determination, especially as I watched my grandfather battle Parkinson's disease himself in his final years. As his condition progressed, our lab sessions became more poignant. His hands would shake too badly to handle equipment, but his mind remained sharp. We would discuss theoretical approaches and experimental designs for hours, his wisdom compensating for his physical limitations. During one of our final conversations, about 6 months before he passed away, Grandpa Ted became unusually serious. We were alone in his home study, surrounded by books and research papers accumulated over a lifetime of scientific pursuit. "Nicholas," he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands, "I need to tell you something important about our family." I leaned forward, noticing the unusual tension in his expression. There are things I have discovered through my work, things about genetic lineage that have troubled me for years, he continued. I want you to know that I have made arrangements to protect what matters most, both for science and for you. When I asked him to elaborate, he shook his head slightly. Not yet. But promise me you will stand firm when the time comes. Your research matters more than you know, and there are complications in our family that you may need to face. Before I could press him further, he changed the subject, returning to a discussion of my current experiments. I respected his privacy, assuming he was referring to the Parkinson's genes that had affected his side of the family. 3 weeks later, his condition deteriorated rapidly. I visited him in the hospital daily, often sitting quietly beside him while working on research notes as he drifted in and out of sleep. Jackson visited twice during the 3-week hospitalization, both times for less than an hour, claiming his business demands prevented longer stays. When Grandpa Ted passed away, the funeral revealed the first cracks in our family facade. My parents and Jackson sat in the front row, accepting condolences with appropriate solemnity. I noticed how many of the attendees were distinguished scientists and researchers, people who had worked with my grandfather over the decades. Most of them sought me out specifically, sharing stories of how proudly Theodore had spoken of my research. My parents seemed uncomfortable with these interactions, hurrying the conversations along whenever possible. 1 week after the funeral, we gathered at the office of Harold Winters, my grandfather's attorney. The wood-paneled conference room felt suffocating as Winters, a meticulous man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses, began reading the will. My expectations were modest, perhaps some books or research materials that would have sentimental value. The actual contents of the will landed like a bomb in the room. To my grandson, Nicholas Griffin, I leave my entire estate valued at $8.7 million, my house in Cambridge, and my private laboratory facility, with the explicit condition that he continues his valuable research work. The silence that followed was absolute. I stared at Winters in disbelief, while feeling the weight of my family's eyes burning into me. There must be some mistake, my father said finally, his voice strained. Winters adjusted his glasses. There is no mistake. Dr. Griffin was extremely clear about his wishes. He made these arrangements over 2 years ago and reviewed them quarterly, most recently 6 weeks before his passing. And what about Jackson? My mother demanded, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. Theodore's other grandson receives nothing. Mr. Jackson Griffin receives Dr. Griffin's collection of first edition scientific texts, valued at approximately $20,000, Winters replied evenly. My brother's face flushed deep red. Books. $20,000 worth of old books while he gets millions. Winters remained perfectly composed. Dr. Griffin was of sound mind when making these decisions. Furthermore, he left a sealed letter explaining his reasoning, which is to remain closed unless certain specific conditions arise. He looked directly at me when mentioning the letter, a subtle communication I didn't understand at the time. As we left the lawyer's office, no one spoke. The tension was palpable, a living thing that followed us to the parking lot. Before driving away, my father gripped my shoulder hard enough to make me wince. We need to discuss this as a family, he said. The tone made it clear this wasn't a request. We met for dinner that evening at Sorellina, an upscale Italian restaurant in Boston where important family occasions had always been celebrated. In the past, these dinners marked Jackson's achievements. His college graduation, his engagement to Amanda, the launch of his first business venture. Now the same setting framed what would become the beginning of our family's unraveling. My parents arrived first, already seated when I walked in. My mother wore her pearl necklace, a signal of serious family matters. Jackson and Amanda arrived last, her uncomfortable expression suggesting she already sensed the brewing storm. After ordering drinks, my mother wasted no time. Nicholas, we need to talk about your grandfather's estate. Her voice carried that particular tone I recognized from childhood, a blend of authority and emotional manipulation. Your father and I have been discussing what Theodore would have really wanted. I took a sip of water. I think he made that quite clear in his will. Legal documents can't capture family nuances, my father interjected, swirling his scotch. Theodore wasn't thinking about the big picture. The big picture being that Jackson should have received more, I asked directly. My mother placed her hand over mine, her touch cold despite the warm restaurant. Honey, you know your brother has financial responsibilities we need to consider. His business is going through a challenging phase. Jackson stared at his bread plate. His latest venture, a tech startup focused on fitness applications, had been struggling for months, something he rarely discussed directly, but my parents often alluded to. I was thinking of establishing a research foundation with the inheritance, I explained. Continuing Grandpa Ted's work on genetic disorders. It's what he wanted. What about what the family needs? My mother's voice quivered with practiced emotion. Your brother has a mortgage, business loans, and he and Amanda are planning to start a family soon. Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside Jackson, her gaze fixed on her water glass. I think what your mother is trying to say, my father continued, is that there needs to be a fair division here. Theodore clearly wasn't in his right mind toward the end. The suggestion that my grandfather had been mentally incompetent sparked something in me. He was battling Parkinson's, Dad, not dementia. His mind was sharp until the very end. He was manipulated, my mother stated suddenly, tears forming. You spent all that time with him, filling his head with your research, while Jackson was out building a real life, taking care of his family responsibilities. Jackson finally spoke up. I visited him too, you know. I was there for him plenty of times when you were too busy with your lab work. I placed my napkin on the table and retrieved my phone. That's interesting because I have every hospital visit logged here. I scrolled through my calendar. I visited 37 times during his 3-week hospitalization. You visited twice for less than an hour each time. You're keeping score. This isn't a competition, Nicholas, my father growled. Apparently it is, I replied evenly. And apparently visiting our dying grandfather loses to whatever business meetings couldn't be rescheduled. Jackson slammed his hand on the table, causing heads to turn. You always thought you were better than me just because you got his precious science genes. You have no idea the pressure I've been under trying to make something of myself while you play around with test tubes on university funding. Play around. My research could help thousands of people with genetic disorders. And my business could have employed dozens if I had the capital to scale it properly, Jackson retorted. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Nicholas, all we're asking is that you consider your brother's needs. Family should support each other. Like you supported my academic achievements, my career choice, my relationship with grandfather. My father's expression hardened. I think you need to reconsider your position here, son. Either you work with us to make this right for the whole family, or you may find yourself no longer welcome in this family. The ultimatum hung in the air. Amanda looked horrified, glancing between Jackson and my parents. I won't dishonor grandfather's wishes, I said finally. He made his decision for reasons that were important to him, and I intend to respect that. My mother stood abruptly. Then you've chosen your side. She gathered her purse, my father already signaling for their coats. Jackson leaned across the table. You always were selfish. Enjoy your money and your precious lab while the rest of us struggle. They all left together, leaving me alone at the table with 4 untouched entrees and the bill. As I paid, I reflected on the irony that this restaurant had always celebrated Jackson's achievements, and now it had witnessed my family's declaration of war against me. That night around 11, my phone rang. It was Jackson, his voice slightly slurred, suggesting he'd been drinking. You know this isn't fair, Nick, he began, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. I'm drowning in debt here. The business is hanging by a thread, and Amanda's parents keep asking when we're going to buy a house, start a family. I'm sorry you're struggling, but... No, you're not, he cut me off. You've always had it easy. Scholarships, grants, grandpa's special attention. You have no idea what real pressure feels like. Jackson, you know what? Fine. Keep the money. But don't expect me to ever forget this. You're choosing cash over family, and that's something you'll have to live with. The call ended abruptly. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by research papers, wondering how my family could so quickly transform inheritance into betrayal. The following day, I noticed several social media posts from extended family members. My cousin Stephanie had posted a vague statement about family loyalty that garnered supportive comments from my parents. My Uncle Thomas shared an article about contested wills with the comment, "Sometimes legal doesn't mean right." The positioning had already begun. Then came the first anonymous message. It arrived via my university email, routed through multiple proxies to hide its source. Research can be replaced. Family can't. Think carefully about what's expendable in your life. I showed the email to my colleague and friend Dr. Eliza Warren the next day. We were in the university lab, separate from my grandfather's private facility that I hadn't yet visited since the will reading. This is concerning Nicholas, she said, her brow furrowed. Are you worried about your safety? Or your research? Both potentially, I admitted. Though it seems designed to intimidate rather than threaten directly. Well, thank goodness for backup protocols, she replied. All your critical data is stored off-site as standard procedure, right? I nodded, grateful for the university's stringent data protection policies. Every significant finding, every important result was automatically backed up to secure servers, with physical copies stored in multiple locations. That evening, working late at the lab, I felt an unfamiliar sense of unease. The message about expendable research lingered in my thoughts. The next morning, I contacted a security company to upgrade the systems at both my apartment and the university lab. It seemed excessive at the time, but something about my family's reaction suggested this conflict was just beginning. 3 days later, I arrived at the lab to find a voicemail waiting on the office line. The message played through the speaker, the voice digitally altered. Griffin, research accidents happen all the time. Contaminated samples, corrupted data, equipment failures. Consider what you're risking by being stubborn. I reported it to campus security and the police, but without a clear threat or identified caller, they could only file a report and suggest caution. That same afternoon, the department head, Dr. Marcus Chambers, called me into his office. Nicholas, I've been hearing concerning things, he began, looking uncomfortable. There's talk that your family situation might impact department funding. What do you mean? He cleared his throat. Your grandfather was a significant donor to the university. Your parents have apparently contacted the development office, suggesting they might challenge those endowments if certain issues aren't resolved. They're trying to pressure me through my work, I realized aloud. I'm not taking sides, Dr. Chambers said carefully. But this department can't afford to be caught in family crossfire. Our grants depend on institutional stability. That evening, returning to my apartment, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Nothing was obviously missing, but things were slightly out of place. The framed photo of me with Grandpa Ted at my PhD graduation was turned at a different angle. Family pictures had been rearranged, with Jackson's prominence subtly elevated in the display. The message was clear. Someone had been in my home. The building security footage showed nothing unusual, suggesting whoever entered had legitimate access or professional skills. I changed my locks that night. 2 days later, my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, confronted me outside the university cafeteria. You should be ashamed, Nicholas, she hissed, blocking my path. Theodore was a good man who would be devastated to see what you're doing. What exactly am I doing, Aunt Patricia? Killing him all over again, her voice cracked with emotion. The stress you caused him in his final months, constantly pestering him about research while he was ill. And now refusing to honor what he would have wanted for the whole family. Do you actually know what he wanted? I asked. Because he made it extremely clear in his will. Wills can be influenced, she snapped before walking away. The confrontation left me shaken. I had always been close with Aunt Patricia, who had no children of her own and had often shown genuine interest in my academic achievements. The speed with which family lines were being drawn was alarming. Jackson requested we meet for coffee the following Saturday. Against my better judgment, I agreed, choosing a busy cafe near campus, hoping the public setting would keep things civil. I was wrong. I need you to reconsider, Nicholas, he said immediately after sitting down, not bothering with pleasantries. My business is about to fold. I'm sorry to hear that. Have you looked into restructuring options? His laugh was bitter. Restructuring doesn't help when you owe $300,000 to investors who are threatening legal action. I nearly choked on my coffee. $300,000. Oh. He lowered his voice, glancing around nervously. Some of the initial investment went to cover personal debts. Gambling debts. Jackson, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, he interrupted. You were too busy being Grandpa's perfect little scientist to notice anything about my life. That's not fair. Fair, his voice rose sharply, drawing stares from nearby tables. You know what's not fair. You getting millions while I'm about to lose everything because I made a few mistakes. If I don't get a significant cash injection soon, Amanda doesn't know it yet, but we'll lose the house. As he became more agitated, other patrons began openly watching our interaction. A barista approached cautiously, asking if everything was all right. It's fine, I assured her, then turned back to Jackson. This isn't the place for this conversation. There won't be another conversation, he replied, standing abruptly. You've made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. 3 days later, I attempted to speak with my father at his investment firm downtown. I thought perhaps one-on-one, away from my mother's emotional intensity, we might have a rational conversation. I was escorted from the building by security after he loudly accused me of trying to ruin him professionally, when I suggested we discuss the inheritance situation privately. The family campaign extended beyond direct confrontation. I learned from a sympathetic cousin that my parents were systematically contacting everyone in our extended family and social circle, presenting a narrative that I had manipulated my grandfather during his illness, isolating him from the family to secure his fortune. The most alarming escalation came in the form of an anonymous tip to the University Ethics Board, suggesting my research methods violated protocols. The accusation was baseless and quickly dismissed after review, but the investigation itself caused disruption and raised questions among colleagues unfamiliar with the family context. Concerned by the increasing pressure, I scheduled an appointment with Harold Winters, my grandfather's lawyer. His office felt like neutral territory in an expanding battlefield. I expected to hear from you sooner, Winters said, gesturing for me to sit. Your grandfather anticipated this situation. He knew my family would react this way. Winters removed his glasses, polishing them methodically. Dr. Griffin was a scientist above all else. He observed patterns and drew conclusions. The family dynamics were concerning to him for many years. What did he tell you? He left specific instructions regarding potential disputes. Winters retrieved a file from his cabinet. He was particularly concerned about the possibility of your research being threatened. Did he say why? The lawyer hesitated. He believed your research was more important than the family realized, both scientifically and personally. He suggested if serious conflict arose, you should examine bloodlines more closely. Bloodlines? You mean genetically? His words, not mine. Winters placed a sealed envelope on the desk. This contains additional instructions that I'm only to share if the situation deteriorates beyond reconciliation. Based on what you've told me today, we're approaching that threshold. What should I do in the meantime? Consider running a comprehensive DNA analysis. Your grandfather seemed to think it would be illuminating. His cryptic suggestion lingered as I left the office. That weekend, I visited my grandfather's house for the first time since his passing. As the new owner, I needed to begin sorting through his belongings, a task I'd postponed during the initial family conflict. The Cambridge home was exactly as he'd left it, his books and papers still arranged on his desk as if he might return to work at any moment. In his study, I noticed a particular book on genetics was slightly out of alignment on the shelf. Pulling it revealed a small wall safe I'd never known existed. The combination lock presented a problem until I tried his favorite mathematical constant, Euler's number, which opened it immediately. Inside were several journals and a USB drive labeled with my name. The journals contained his private research notes spanning decades, including observations about our family that became increasingly concerned in the later entries. One passage from 6 months before his death stood out. Genetic inconsistencies in family samples continue to trouble me. The pattern suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of lineage that, if confirmed, would explain decades of family tension. Nicholas must know the truth, but only when he's prepared to face its implications. That night, I set up advanced security systems at both my apartment and the university lab, including motion sensors and cameras that would alert my phone of any unauthorized entry. The investment seemed justified when, just after midnight, my mother called. "Nicholas, this has gone too far," she said without greeting. "You've humiliated your father at his workplace and spread rumors about Jackson's finances. I've done neither of those things." "Don't lie to me," she hissed. "We raised you better than this." "Did you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you've been trying to undermine me my entire life." A long silence followed before she spoke again, her voice chillingly calm. "You're going to lose everything, Nicholas. One way or another's." After the call, I collected the most critical backup drives and research samples, storing them in a secure location off campus. As I worked late into the night, I began examining the contents of my grandfather's USB drive, discovering that he had been running secret DNA analyses on family members for years, collecting samples from discarded cups at family gatherings and holiday dinners. The results had clearly disturbed him, though his notes were frustratingly vague about the specific findings. What was he trying to tell me about our family's bloodline? And why did he believe it was connected to my inheritance and research? 2 weeks after discovering my grandfather's secret research, I was working late in the university lab. It was nearly 11 at night, and I was alone in the building's research wing, running a critical experiment that could validate years of work on genetic markers for neurological disorders. The specialized equipment hummed around me, multiple gene sequencers processing samples simultaneously, centrifuges separating cellular material, and computer systems analyzing data in real time. My focus was absolute until my phone vibrated with a security alert. The motion sensors I'd installed had detected someone entering the building using an access card. The accompanying image from the security camera showed my mother, her expression determined as she swiped a card that shouldn't have been in her possession. I had seconds to decide how to respond. Call campus security. Confront her directly. Lock the lab doors. Each option carried risks, but something told me I needed to understand exactly what she intended. I quickly set my phone to record video and placed it on a shelf with the camera facing the door, angled to capture most of the lab. When she entered, I was surprised by her composure. She wore a tailored navy suit as if coming from a business meeting, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, nothing in her appearance suggesting someone about to commit a destructive act. "Nicholas," she said calmly, closing the door behind her. "Working late as usual." "Mom, how did you get access to this building?" She smiled thinly. Your father still plays golf with Dean Harrington. Access cards aren't difficult to arrange when you have the right connections. I maintained my position beside the primary gene sequencer, watching as she surveyed the lab equipment. What do you want? I wanted to see it, she replied, running her fingers along the edge of a workstation. The precious research that's worth destroying our family over. I'm not destroying anything. I'm honoring Grandpa Ted's wishes. Her expression darkened. Ted. Always Ted, she spat the name like it tasted bitter. Do you have any idea what it was like being married to Robert while living in the shadow of the great Dr. Theodore Griffin? The constant comparison, the academic elitism, the subtle condescension whenever we made choices he wouldn't have made. This was unexpected territory, a glimpse into family dynamics I'd never considered. Is that what this is about? Resentment toward grandfather. 30 years, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. 30 years of hearing how brilliant Theodore was, how his work was changing the world, while your father and I built a normal, successful life that was never quite good enough. She moved further into the lab, examining the equipment with unsettling intensity. And then you came along, so much like him. The same mannerisms, the same obsessive focus on your precious science. This isn't about me or grandfather. It's about Jackson, isn't it? Jackson deserves that inheritance, she said, her voice rising slightly. He's struggling. He has real-world problems, not theoretical scientific puzzles. And that's grandfather's responsibility. How, exactly? Blood is thicker than water, Nicholas. Family takes care of family. Theodore owed it to all of us after years of making us feel inadequate. She had reached the central workstation now, where my most recent samples were being processed. Critical research materials were spread across the surface, carefully labeled and organized. Those samples represent 10 years of work, I said quietly. Please don't touch them. Something shifted in her expression then, a calculation behind her eyes. 10 years. Interesting. About the same amount of time, Jackson has been trying to build his business. The difference is you had Theodore's constant support, his connections, his validation. What did Jackson have? Parents who tried their best, but couldn't open doors the way a world-famous scientist could. Her hand hovered over a rack of test tubes. If Jackson had received even a fraction of the advantages you've had. This isn't about advantage. It's about choices and consequences. That's when she snapped. The composed facade crumbled as she swept her arm across the workstation, sending dozens of sample tubes crashing to the floor. Choices. What about my choices? What about living with the great man's disappointment every time we chose differently than he would have? I remained still, watching as she moved to my documentation, grabbing fistfuls of research notes and tearing them into pieces. What about Jackson's choices? She continued, her voice rising to a shout as she appended a digital storage unit. He didn't choose to be compared to you his entire life. He didn't choose to be found wanting by a grandfather who clearly favored you. I said nothing, observing as she systematically destroyed thousands of dollars worth of equipment, smashing delicate instruments against countertops, pouring chemicals over irreplaceable physical samples, deleting files from computers she accessed with surprising knowledge of my password patterns. Do you know what it's like watching one child receive everything while the other struggles? She screamed, tears now streaming down her face as she knocked over a specialized microscope worth nearly $50,000. Your brother deserves grandfather's estate more than you. The destruction continued for nearly 5 minutes, my mother moving through the lab like a force of nature, targeting anything that looked valuable or important. I remained motionless, my lack of resistance seemingly fueling her rage rather than satisfying it. Finally, breathing heavily amid the wreckage of my visible work, she turned to me with a mixture of defiance and satisfaction. Now what, Nicholas? Will you call the police on your own mother? Add criminal charges to this family disaster. I met her gaze steadily. I have just one question. What? She snapped. What do you think DNA tests would show about our family? Her expression changed instantly, the color draining from her face. Without another word, she turned and fled the lab, leaving me alone among the destruction. Once the door closed behind her, I moved to retrieve my phone, stopping the recording. Looking around at the devastation, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. My most valuable research data was securely backed up off-site. The physical damage, while extensive, was primarily to equipment that could be replaced. I dialed Harold Winters's number, despite the late hour. "It's Nicholas Griffin," I said when he answered. "I think it's time to open that sealed envelope." The university's response to the destruction was swift and comprehensive. Campus police secured the scene, while administrators documented the damage for insurance purposes. The security footage I'd captured provided irrefutable evidence of what had occurred, though I initially withheld the identity of the perpetrator, saying only that it was related to a family dispute. Dr. Chambers was surprisingly supportive once he understood the situation. "We can expedite replacement of the critical equipment," he assured me, "and will provide temporary space in the high-security research wing until your lab is restored." The insurance claims process began immediately, with preliminary estimates putting the damage at over $300,000. The university's legal team advised me that pressing criminal charges would strengthen the insurance claim, but I hesitated, unwilling to publicly criminalize my mother despite her actions. What I couldn't avoid was the media attention. A break-in at a university genetics lab was newsworthy in itself. The connection to the recently deceased Dr. Theodore Griffin and his substantial estate made it irresistible to local journalists. I provided only minimal comments, confirming that valuable research had been damaged, but that backups existed and the work would continue. The day after the incident, I met with Harold Winters at his office. He had watched the security footage with grave concern. "This clearly crosses the threshold Dr. Griffin established," he said, retrieving a sealed envelope from his safe. He was explicit that this information was to be shared only if family conflict threatened your research directly. The envelope contained a detailed letter written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, steady despite his disease. "My dear Nicholas, if you're reading this, the family situation has deteriorated as I feared it might. What I'm about to share will be difficult to accept, but as a scientist, you understand that truth, however painful, is preferable to comfortable deception. For nearly 15 years, I've harbored suspicions about our family's genetic relationships. It began with routine blood work I conducted for a family health study, comparing genetic markers across generations. The inconsistencies I found were subtle but significant to a trained eye. In short, the genetic markers indicate that Jackson is not biologically related to me. The patterns suggest he is your father's son, but not from your mother. This explains much about the family dynamics you've experienced throughout your life. I never shared this discovery out of respect for your parents' privacy and concern for how it might affect Jackson. However, I've left my estate specifically to you not merely out of preference, but because you are my only biological grandchild. In my private laboratory, you'll find preserved DNA samples and my original analysis. I suggest you verify these findings independently before proceeding. Whatever you choose to do with this information, remember that the pursuit of truth has always been our family's real legacy. With love and confidence in your judgment, Theodore Griffin." I read the letter twice, certain I had misunderstood. "This can't be right," I said finally. "Your grandfather was thorough in his research," Winters replied. "He shared his concerns with me in confidence several years ago, though I advised against including this information directly in his will. The implications were staggering. If true, Jackson wasn't biologically related to our grandfather. More shocking still was the suggestion that he wasn't my mother's biological son, which would mean. My father had an affair," I said aloud, the pieces suddenly connecting. "And Jackson is the result." "That appears to be your grandfather's conclusion," Winters confirmed. though he recommended you verify it independently. As I drove to my grandfather's private lab facility, memories resurfaced of conversations that suddenly held new meaning. My mother's excessive attention to Jackson, almost compensatory in its intensity. My father's visible discomfort whenever paternity or family resemblance was mentioned. The absence of baby pictures of Jackson before he was about 6 months old explained away as a camera malfunction during that period. The private lab was exactly as my grandfather had left it, a testament to his methodical nature. Using the key provided by Winters, I entered the climate-controlled facility housed in a converted carriage house behind the main Cambridge property. Following my grandfather's notes, I located a refrigerated storage unit containing carefully preserved tissue and blood samples from every family member, collected over years during family gatherings. Some were labeled as coming from discarded cups or tissues, others from routine medical tests he had offered to process to save the family money on lab fees. Using the state-of-the-art equipment, superior even to the university facilities, I began the process of extracting and analyzing genetic markers. The technology had advanced significantly since my grandfather had first conducted his analysis, allowing for more detailed examination of relationship patterns. I worked methodically for 3 days, sleeping on a cot in the lab, focused entirely on the scientific process. The results were unambiguous and aligned precisely with my grandfather's conclusions. The genetic markers clearly showed that Jackson shared paternal DNA with my father, but had no biological connection to either my mother or grandfather. Further analysis of timelines and historical family records pointed to a specific period when my father had worked closely with his administrative assistant, Carol Winters, no relation to the lawyer, during a stressful expansion of his investment firm. The affair had apparently lasted several months before ending abruptly when Carol relocated to Chicago. The timing aligned perfectly with Jackson's conception. Most shocking was the additional discovery that my mother must have known the truth all along. Medical records in my grandfather's files indicated she had been hospitalized for a condition that would have made conception impossible during the period when Jackson was supposedly conceived. The question remained: had my grandfather told anyone else about his discovery? Had he confronted my parents? The journals suggested he had maintained his silence, observing the family dynamics with the detachment of a scientist studying a particularly complex system. I reached out to my friend Eliza, needing an objective perspective on the ethical implications. "This is an impossible situation," she acknowledged after I shared the findings. "Jackson has built his entire identity around being a griffin, being Theodore's grandson. And my parents have maintained this deception for over 30 years, I added. "Imagine the psychological weight of that secret. What will you do?" I considered the options carefully. The truth will come out eventually. Secrets like this always do. Better it happens in a controlled way than as a weapon in some future family conflict. After consulting again with Winters about the legal implications, I made my decision. I would present the evidence at a formal family meeting, allowing everyone to process the information together rather than in fragmentary, potentially more destructive ways. Winters arranged for the meeting to take place at his office the following week. The official purpose was listed as resolution of estate matters, vague enough not to raise immediate alarms, but serious enough to ensure attendance. In the days leading up to the meeting, I prepared a comprehensive presentation of the evidence, including visual displays of the genetic markers and supporting documentation. I ran additional confirmation tests, wanting absolute certainty before proceeding with a revelation that would permanently alter our family structure. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in my grandfather's study, surrounded by his books and the accumulated wisdom of his life's work. I felt the weight of responsibility he had placed on me, not just for his financial legacy, but for the truth he had discovered and protected until it became necessary to reveal it. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Grandpa Ted," I said aloud to the empty room. Whether this truth would heal or destroy our family remained to be seen, but the scientist in me, the part most like him, knew that facts eventually demand acknowledgement, regardless of the comfort of denial. Harold Winters's conference room was meticulously prepared for the family meeting. A projection screen had been set up at one end of the long mahogany table. 8 leather chairs were arranged with precision, water glasses at each place. The room temperature was perfectly regulated to eliminate at least one potential source of discomfort on what promised to be an extraordinarily uncomfortable day. I arrived an hour early, connecting my laptop to the projection system and arranging documents in precise stacks before each seat. Winters appeared briefly to confirm arrangements before retreating to his office, understanding that his presence would be required only for the legal aspects of our discussion. My parents arrived together at exactly 2 o'clock. My mother wore a pearl gray suit that projected confidence and authority. My father looked unusually tired, his normally impeccable appearance showing subtle signs of strain. A slightly loosened tie, the beginning of stubble he would typically never allow. Nicholas, my mother acknowledged coolly, selecting a seat farthest from where I had placed my materials. I hope this meeting will finally bring some reasonableness to this situation. My father nodded without speaking, avoiding direct eye contact. In retrospect, his discomfort was telling, though I attributed it at the time to lingering tension from our last encounter. Jackson and Amanda arrived 5 minutes late. He entered with the aggressive confidence of someone who believes they have the moral high ground. Amanda looked nervous, her eyes darting between family members as they took seats opposite my parents. "Let's get this over with," Jackson said immediately. "Have you finally decided to do the right thing?" I remained standing at the head of the table. "I've decided it's time for complete honesty, yes." "About time," my mother muttered. Winters entered then, nodding professionally to everyone before taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "As you all know, I'm here in my capacity as executor of Dr. Theodore Griffin's estate. Nicholas has requested this meeting to address concerns about the inheritance distribution." "Concerns is putting it mildly," my father interjected. "This situation has torn the family apart." "Before we discuss the estate itself," I began, "there's some important context that affects everything else." I gestured toward the screen where I had prepared my presentation. "What I'm about to share will be difficult for everyone, but it's information that directly impacts the inheritance question." "What are you talking about?" My mother's voice carried an edge of wariness. I began by displaying the security footage from the lab destruction. "First, I think we need to acknowledge what happened 2 weeks ago." The room fell silent as the video played, showing my mother's systematic destruction of my research lab. Jackson's expression shifted from shock to something more calculating. My father grew pale, while Amanda covered her mouth with her hand. When the footage ended, I turned to face them directly. "This act destroyed equipment worth over $300,000 and attempted to eliminate 10 years of research data." "Nicholas, I was upset," my mother began, her composure cracking slightly. "Surely you understand." "What I understand," I interrupted calmly, "is that this level of destruction suggests something far deeper than a simple inheritance dispute. It suggests a desperate attempt to protect a secret." I clicked to the next slide, showing a photograph of my grandfather in his lab. After this incident, Harold provided me with a sealed letter grandfather left, to be opened only if family conflict threatened my research. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What kind of letters?" One explaining why he structured his will the way he did. I moved to the next slide, showing a simplified diagram of genetic inheritance patterns. Grandfather was a geneticist who specialized in hereditary markers. Over the years, he collected and analyzed DNA samples from our entire family. My mother's face had gone completely white. She reached for her water with a visibly trembling hand. His analysis revealed something significant that informed his decision about his estate. I displayed the next slide showing comparative DNA markers. These are the genetic markers that establish biological relationships between family members. Jackson leaned forward, squinting at the display. What exactly are we looking at here? Evidence that you, Jackson, are not biologically related to our grandfather. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Further analysis confirms you are Dad's biological son, but not Mom's. The silence that followed was absolute. Amanda reached for Jackson's hand, but he pulled away, standing abruptly. "This is bullshit," he declared. "Some kind of fabricated evidence to justify keeping everything for yourself." "It's not fabricated," I replied evenly. "I've verified grandfather's findings with multiple tests using the most current technology. The genetic markers are definitive." "You expect us to believe this," my mother finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can provide the raw data for independent verification," I offered. "But there's more supporting evidence." I clicked to a timeline showing employment records and hospital documentation. Mom was hospitalized with a condition that made conception impossible during the period when Jackson would have been conceived. Meanwhile, Dad was working closely with his administrative assistant, Carol Winters, who abruptly relocated to Chicago approximately 7 months before Jackson's birth. My father dropped his head into his hands. "Jesus Christ." Jackson turned to our father, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "Dad, is this true?" The room waited as my father slowly raised his head, years of careful deception collapsing in his expression. "It was a difficult time in our marriage," he began haltingly. "Your mother and I were struggling. Carol was. It was a mistake. A brief relationship that ended when she discovered she was pregnant." "And then what happened?" I prompted, though I had already pieced it together from the evidence. "She was going to give the baby up for adoption," he continued, not meeting anyone's eyes. "But I couldn't. I couldn't let that happen. I told your mother everything. We had been trying for another child without success, and I suggested that maybe we could raise you as our own," my mother finished, looking directly at Jackson for the first time since the revelation began. "We agreed to tell everyone I was pregnant, while Carol went to stay with relatives in Chicago. When you were born, we brought you home as our son." Jackson had gone completely still. "So my entire life has been a lie," it wasn't a question. "No," my mother insisted. "We are your parents in every way that matters. We raised you, loved you." "Did Grandpa know?" Jackson interrupted, turning to me. "I believe he suspected for many years based on genetic similarities he observed," I explained. "But he only confirmed it through testing in the last few years of his life. According to his notes, he never confronted anyone about it." "So that's why," Jackson said quietly. "That's why he left everything to you." "Because I'm not really a griffin." "Biologically, no," I acknowledged. "But his decision was more specific than that. His will explicitly states the inheritance goes to his biological heirs." He was very precise about that language. Harold Winters nodded in confirmation. The wording was indeed unusually specific on that point. My father finally turned to Jackson. "Son, I'm so sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing. Giving you a stable family, opportunities." "Don't," Jackson cut him off. "Just don't," he turned to our mother. "And you've known all along. Every time you pushed me to connect with Grandpa Ted, every time you compared me to Nicholas, you knew I wasn't even related to him." My mother's carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. "I was trying to make it real," she said through tears. "If you connected with him, if he loved you as much as he loved Nicholas, then it would make it true somehow. And when that didn't happen, you resented him," I realized aloud. "And me, by extension." "He knew," she said, her voice rising. "He knew, and he still favored you. He could have treated Jackson equally, but he chose not to. And then he made it absolutely clear in his will that blood was all that mattered to him." "That's not true," I replied. "His letter explained that he kept this knowledge private out of respect for all of you, to protect the family structure. He only made provision for it to be revealed if the inheritance caused destructive conflict. Like destroying your lab, Amanda said quietly, speaking for the first time. Jackson turned to her, as if suddenly remembering her presence. Did you know about any of this? She shook her head emphatically. Of course not, Jack. This is as shocking to me as it is to you. He nodded once, then looked back at our parents. My whole life makes sense now. Why I never quite measured up, why I never had the Griffin genius everyone talked about. I wasn't a real Griffin. Jackson, our father, began. I want to know about my biological mother, Jackson interrupted. I want her name, contact information, everything you have. My father nodded slowly. Of course. Whatever you want to know. Jackson stood abruptly. I need some air. He walked out without another word, Amanda hurrying after him. The room fell silent again. My mother stared at the genetic markers still displayed on the screen, tears streaming down her face. My father looked hollowed out, the weight of decades of deception visibly crushing him. Why did you destroy the lab? I asked my mother directly. What did you think that would accomplish? She wiped at her tears with a tissue from her purse. I thought if I destroyed your research, you'd understand what it felt like to lose something precious. That maybe you'd be more willing to share the inheritance then. You knew about the backup data, I stated rather than asked. You specifically targeted visible equipment and materials, not the primary data storage. She nodded slightly. I didn't want to destroy your career, Nicholas. I just wanted you to feel some of our desperation. Harold Winters cleared his throat. Given these revelations, the terms of the will are unambiguous. The estate passes to Nicholas as Dr. Griffin's only biological grandchild. My father nodded in resignation. We won't contest it further. I gathered my materials slowly, allowing the weight of truth to settle around us. As I prepared to leave, I paused at the door. I'm going to find Jackson. I think we need to talk, just the two of us. I found him in the parking lot, leaning against his car while Amanda stood nearby, clearly giving him space while remaining supportive. Jackson, I said as I approached. I'd like to talk if you're willing. Not here, somewhere private. He looked up, his expression unreadable. Why not? Nothing could make this day any worse. Amanda touched his arm gently. I'll take an Uber home. You two should talk. After she left, Jackson and I walked in silence to a small park across from the law office. Finding an isolated bench, we sat with the appropriate distance between us that our relationship had always maintained. I want you to know, I began carefully, that I never suspected any of this. Not until grandfather's letter. He nodded, staring at the ground. 34 years. That's how long they've been lying to me. He looked up suddenly. Did you run a DNA test on yourself too? How do you know you're the biological golden child? Yes, I verified all the relationships. I am biologically related to both our parents and to grandfather. Lucky you, he said bitterly, but without the hostility that had characterized our recent interactions. So what happens now? You get the millions, the house, the lab, and I get a new identity crisis. The money and property, yes, I acknowledged. But there's something else you should know about grandfather. Something that might help make sense of how he treated you. Jackson raised an eyebrow, waiting. His journals show that he suspected the truth for years, but chose not to expose it. He believed it would cause unnecessary pain to everyone, especially you. He kept the secret to protect you, not to punish you. Then why leave everything to you? I think he knew this would eventually come out. That money has a way of forcing truth to the surface. By structuring his will as he did, he ensured the revelation would happen in a controlled way, rather than through some destructive family investigation. Jackson considered this. Still hurts like hell. I can imagine, though truthfully, I couldn't fully comprehend the foundation-shifting nature of what he was experiencing. For what it's worth, I'm still your brother. Different DNA doesn't change the fact that we grew up together, fought together, share the same history. For the first time, something in his expression softened slightly. Half-brothers, technically. Half-brothers, I agreed. Better than no brother at all. We sat in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. I need to find her. Carol, my biological mother. I'll help if you want. Grandfather's resources might make that easier. He nodded slowly. I might take you up on that. He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. I can't process all of this right now. I need time. Take all the time you need, I replied. I'm not going anywhere. As he walked away, I realized that amid all the destruction and revelation, a small opening for genuine connection had formed between us. Whether it would grow into something meaningful remained to be seen, but it was more than we'd had before the truth emerged. 3 months passed quickly as I focused on rebuilding what had been destroyed. The insurance settlement covered the replacement of equipment, and the university provided additional funding to upgrade the lab beyond its previous capabilities. The gleaming new facility housed state-of-the-art gene sequencing technology and advanced computational systems for genetic analysis. With the inheritance settled, I established the Theodore Griffin Foundation for Genetic Research, allocating $5 million from the estate to fund promising studies in genetic disorders. The foundation's first grants went to early career researchers, focusing on conditions similar to the Parkinson's that had affected my grandfather. My own research team expanded to include 3 talented postdoctoral fellows and 2 research assistants, all drawn to the project by the Foundation's resources and the chance to continue Theodore Griffin's legacy of groundbreaking work. The data recovered from secure backups provided continuity, allowing us to progress from where we'd left off before the destruction. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I was reviewing simulation results when the lab's security system announced a visitor. The monitor showed Jackson waiting at the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Let him in, I instructed the system. When he entered, I noticed immediate changes. His designer clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a sweater. The carefully maintained tan had faded, and he'd grown a short beard. Most significantly, the tension he'd always carried in his shoulders seemed lessened. Nice setup, he commented, looking around the lab. Very sci-fi. Thanks. The foundation funding allowed for some upgrades. I gestured to a small seating area in the corner. Coffee. He nodded and we moved to the more comfortable space, away from the equipment and staff. I found her, he said after taking a sip. Carol, my biological mother. How did that go? Better than I expected. She's in Philadelphia now, teaching high school science. Married with 2 kids, my half-siblings, I guess. He rotated the coffee cup in his hands. She always wondered what happened to me. Dad told her I'd been adopted by a good family, not that he was raising me himself. That must have been a shock for her. She cried when we met. Said I looked just like her father. A small smile appeared briefly. She kept track of Dad's career over the years, saw family photos in business magazines. She knew who I was, but respected the agreement to stay away. I let that sink in. How do you feel about all of it? He considered the question seriously. Lost at first. Angry. But now mostly. Curious. I'm learning about a whole other side of my genetic heritage. Things that explain parts of me that never fit the Griffin mold. Like what? Carol's family has a history in music and art. Her father was a jazz musician. I always had an ear for music, but never pursued it because it wasn't a Griffin thing, he shrugged. Makes me wonder what else I set aside trying to be something I wasn't biologically wired to be. And our parents, I asked carefully. Limited contact, he replied. I'm civil with Dad. We've had some honest conversations that were painful but necessary. Mom is. It's complicated. The decades of pressure to be the perfect Griffin make more sense now, but it doesn't excuse it. And Amanda. She's been incredible throughout all this. Said it doesn't change who I am to her. His expression softened. We're actually expecting. Found out last week. Jackson, that's wonderful. Congratulations. He nodded, a genuine smile appearing. Thanks. It's put a lot in perspective. I want to be honest with my kid from day one. No family secrets, no impossible expectations. You'll be a good father, I said, meaning it. Hope so, he paused, looking around the lab again. So this is what you do all day. Stare at genetic code. I laughed. Sometimes. Other times we're running experiments, analyzing results, writing grant proposals. We actually had a breakthrough last month using Grandpa Ted's methodology on a rare genetic marker. I'd like to hear about it sometime. Not that I'd understand much, but he hesitated. I'd like to know more about his work. About what you do. I'd be happy to show you. There's actually an interesting family connection to some of it. We spent the next hour in an unexpectedly comfortable conversation, Jackson asking thoughtful questions about our grandfather's research and legacy. As our coffee grew cold, he brought up the subject we'd both been avoiding. I want to apologize for how I reacted to the inheritance initially. The gambling, the threats, all of it. Water under the bridge, I assured him. No, it matters. I was drowning financially and too proud to admit it. Taking it out on you was easier than facing my own mistakes. I nodded, accepting his apology without minimizing its importance. How's the business now? Closed it. Best decision I ever made. I'm working with a friend's startup in a completely different field. Less money but way less stress. And I'm taking night classes in music production just for myself. As he prepared to leave, Jackson paused at the door. The memorial dedication for Grandpa's research wing is next month, right? I'd like to attend if that's okay. I'd like that, I replied, genuinely pleased by the request. The following weeks brought unexpected healing. The Theodore Griffin Memorial Research Wing was dedicated at the university with most of the family in attendance, including Jackson and Amanda. My parents came separately, maintaining appropriate distance while making individual efforts to repair damaged relationships. My mother's path to reconciliation was the most difficult. Her initial attempts focused on justification rather than accountability, but eventually, with the help of therapy, she began to acknowledge the decades of favoritism and pressure she had placed on both of us for different reasons. My father's approach was more straightforward. He admitted his failings directly and asked what he could do to make amends. For Jackson, this meant complete transparency about his biological mother and assistance in building that relationship. For me, it meant respecting my work and choices without comparison or judgment. The true family I built around me expanded beyond blood relations. My research colleagues became close friends, particularly Eliza, whose unwavering support throughout the crisis evolved into something deeper over time. Jackson and Amanda became regular dinner guests, our conversations increasingly relaxed and genuine as old tensions faded. 6 months after the confrontation, we held a small ceremony dedicating a new scholarship in Theodore Griffin's name. As I stood at the podium addressing the gathered researchers and family members, I found myself reflecting on what I had learned through the ordeal. My grandfather understood that legacy isn't defined by DNA alone, I told the audience. Though he was a geneticist who mapped the molecular building blocks of heredity, he knew that what we build with our lives matters more than what we inherit in our genes. His work was never about determining who belongs in a family, but about understanding the complex interplay between biology and environment that makes us who we are. I looked at Jackson, seated in the front row with Amanda, her pregnancy now visible. Family can be defined by blood, by law, by choice, or by love. Sometimes all of these, sometimes only some. What matters is truth and the courage to face it. The Foundation's work progressed rapidly in the following months. The first patients began receiving treatments developed through our research, children with genetic disorders previously considered untreatable. Watching their progress provided validation beyond any academic recognition. One evening, reviewing patient data in my grandfather's study, now my own, I came across a photo of him holding me as a child. His expression captured exactly what I had come to understand about him. His love for science was matched by his love for family, however complicated that family might be. The inheritance that had nearly torn us apart had ultimately forced truths to the surface that, while painful, created space for authentic relationships to form. By standing firm in honoring my grandfather's wishes, I had unwittingly fulfilled his deeper purpose. Bringing truth to a family built on necessary but ultimately destructive secrets. The journey taught me that truth provides freedom, even when the path to it leads through pain. That boundaries can be forms of respect rather than rejection. That healing often begins precisely when we stop protecting ourselves and others from difficult realities. As I continue my grandfather's work, I carry these lessons with me daily. His scientific legacy lives on in research that helps real people. His personal legacy lives on in a family slowly learning to connect with authenticity rather than obligation or expectation. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? How did you handle the truth when it finally emerged? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life journeys of facing difficult truths. Remember, sometimes standing firm for what's right feels like standing alone, but truth has a way of creating space for genuine connection. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage in facing whatever truths your own life may reveal.